When you make a top 10 video, you come to expect, oh, I can't believe you didn't put this, and this on there. It's going to be exemplified with this video, guys, because favorite author of all time. How do I put like 50 books that I love down to a top 10? Hey, what's up, bookworms and constant reader? Yes, we are here today to do the top 10 video I never thought that I'd make. I thought I'd finish those tier lists first, but I've taken a very, very long time to do those, so I figured I would do this. Now, I want to say up front, guys, this is subject to change. Obviously, I'm doing a lot of rereads right now of Stephen King stories. There's some things I actually haven't read before. They might actually crack into this. You never do know. So as of right now, June of 2025, these would be the top 10 Stephen King books in preferential order. So it's very, very tempting to say, hey, these are in no order. And then I'd have nothing but, hey, why don't you rank them, you coward? And I said, why don't I? Why don't I go ahead and do that? So not counting collections, not counting short stories, novellas, things like that. This is just novels. But I'm not going to be doing any honorable mentions either, because that would make this video 65 minutes long, and I'm not trying to do that right now. So really, again, you're getting down to top 10. And again, you think, man, I have way more than 10 Stephen King books that I think are S tier. They're just amazing. But again, only 10 can make it. It's very, very hard to do. So as I continue into the multiverse, maybe these will change. But again, as of today, this is what I got. Let's go ahead and kick it off with number 10. This one is Stephen writing, not as himself, but as Richard Bachman. This is The Long Walk. What I love about The Long Walk is only Stephen King could be such a great character writer that not only would he write this when he was a teenager, but he can write this story where people literally just walk the entire book at 4 miles per hour. And you get so attached to all these characters, and you go into it like you would with the Hunger Games or a Battle Royale, where you just know, okay, or maybe Squid Game, like, none of these people are going to make it. You know, in this story, only one person is going to survive till the end. That's what this contest is. You're down to one. And you tell yourself, don't get attached to these characters, but Stephen's such a damn good character writer, you're going to get connected to these characters. And there's even going to be the ones that you love to hate. You're going to want to see their story come to fruition, and Long Walk does it to perfection. And it just blows my mind thinking that Stephen King wrote this when he was like 17 years old. The guy had a gift, and I'm glad that he pursued it, obviously, but The Long Walk, you can see very, very clearly that there's a reason this book is so beloved by people who've read it, and it's just so poignant to so many things, and it can mean so much to so many people, and it has one of those endings that people still talk about and debate today, but not like, is it good or bad, like people do with a lot of Stephen King stories, because it just has so many different meanings, I think, to different people. It kind of means what the book means to you, I think, and it's an ending that I have a lot of passion for and have talked about before, and I love it. I just love this story so much, and I think so many authors have borrowed from this story, and it's just incredible. It really, really is. And I hope the movie's good. I really do, because I felt like this is one that's just ripe for adaptation. It doesn't really feel like it would take a lot to make a really great movie of this. But again, you're talking about a story where people literally just walk the entire story, and it's just that good. Number 9, I have to go with Misery. Now, with Misery, what's really fascinating about this one is because I think we've all been guilty of maybe our fandom becoming a little too much sometimes. You're like, maybe I'm not really what I would call obsessed or fanatic about it, but again, in the end, these are people that form your way of life. These are people that mean the world to you. You feel like you know these people, this sports athlete, this writer, this movie star, this Twitch streamer. You feel like you know them. And so it just gets to the point where you're just like, okay, well, why don't they know me the same way? So you're like, I'm your number one fan. You should know me the same way. And you see where the fanaticism sometimes can go a little too far. And I think with Misery, what makes this one just great is he writes suffering in a way I've never seen it written before. It's just, you feel for Paul the whole time. And not just because, okay, he's being held against his will. I mean, this guy is suffering greatly this entire story, both physically and mentally. He's being forced to do something he didn't want to do, and he's in fear of he could get killed at any moment because Annie, one of the best Stephen King villains, because she could absolutely happen. She could very much happen in the real world, and it's just terrifying to think about. So yes, this was written in response to when he wrote The Dragon's Eyes. He wrote that book, and I think everybody just kind of like, stay in your lane, you're only a horror writer. And it kind of influenced it to be like, this is what happens when you kind of step outside of your comfort zone and people get a little fanatical. And I appreciate him exercising his demons that way instead of just attacking his fans. Like a lot of authors would do today. They just go on social media and just absolutely attack their fans. I think this is a good way of kind of getting those demons out when he wrote this. And Misery is one of those that have you holding your breath until the very end. Again, Annie Wilkes, one of the best King villains ever. And, sometimes his big scary monsters are actually human. And that is a questionable thing about Annie. Is she human? I guess on paper. Number 8, there was a time where I was going through a breakup with Stephen King. I was very, very disgruntled with how The Dark Tower concluded. And I was just like, you know what, maybe I've outgrown Stephen King. And I didn't read him for like a decade. But if you guys don't know, I am absolutely obsessed with the JFK assassination. Like, I've went to Dallas, I've walked the steps, I've seen everything that they claim Oswald did in the time period that they did. Very much can be what you would call a tinfoil hat guy in there. And I'm going to stop talking about it before like the little red laser shows up on my head for talking about it too much. But I am absolutely obsessed with it. So I was in this breakup period with him. But I said, he's writing a book about the JFK assassination? How can I say no? And guys, what I got with 11/22/63 completely floored me. I was like, at this point in his career, he should not be writing a book this long, changing genres to what I would say is a romance, a romantic love story, and filling in the gaps of some of the most researched thing I've ever done in my life, the JFK assassination. Just beautiful. Absolutely incredible story. Jake and Sadie will forever be like relationship goals. Star-crossed lovers just takes a new ripple here with time-crossed lovers. It's just beautiful. One of the best endings ever. And I know everybody like, well, actually, Joe Hill thought of that ending. Whatever, man. It's an amazing ending. I love it, and it's one of those books that just completely just whisked me away to another time. He wrote the time period just so beautifully, and that love story is just incredible. I was like, oh my God, this guy could have been a really good romance writer. Holy hell. Just beautiful, beautiful story. And if you're a JFK nut, like I was, like, I came for the JFK stuff, and I stayed for the love story. It was really just that magical. And this is a story that I can't wait to revisit it when I get to it into the multiverse, because this is a thick book. I devoured it that first night that I had it. I just could not stop reading it. And I read this book in like 3 days. I love it. I think I called it the stick to work one day to finish it. It was just that good. And I think it will be upon a reread. And that's one of those I tell people, you don't care about length, but you want to know where to start with Stephen King? That's a great place to start if you don't mind a big old tome of a book. And as fantasy fans, I don't feel like we do. But yeah, I think that's one you don't have to be a Stephen King fan necessarily to read 11/22/63 or be a JFK assassination nut. You just like a really good story. That's a really, really great one. I can't recommend it enough. Now, number 7, I'm going to count this as 1 because I think I learned when I did my top 10 fantasy books of all time, and I put like a Lord of the Rings book and a Song of Ice and Fire book, and I did put it as a series. People got mad. They were like, oh, but that's a series. So I'm going to put The Dark Tower at number 7 as a series, because if I just put one book on here, that's what it's all going to be. Like, well, how can you do that? It's a full story. For me, The Dark Tower, I have my complaints about books 6 and 7. Song of Susanna might be one of my least favorite Stephen King books of all time. But those first 5 books are without a doubt one of the best fantasy stories I've ever read. And that's why Dark Tower is still a top 5 fantasy series all time for me, because it's just an incredible mashup of so many genres that shouldn't work, but it does. He's kind of telling like an Arthurian legend, but instead of swords and armor, he's got cowboy boots and pistols. I love this world that he created. It's so fascinating. You don't get the answers right away, and it makes you be like, what am I reading right now? God, you just want to find out. You want to know, what is this? It seems like a very familiar version of our world, but just a little different. And they talk about all the time, well, this world moved on, and you want to know more about it. And I think that's what just keeps going, is the mystery of this world, wanting to know what's over that next hill. But the quartet that gets formed together here, Roland and his allies, is just an amazing, amazing found family kind of trope that I love. And he does it in a way with the most unlikely of individuals. I mean, this is just like oil and water, these characters, and they grow to be super, super close. And it has some just amazing relationships and memorable villains, some really, really just messed up features in the story. And yes, there's some things he did where he took chances that I didn't like. But hey, I still tip my hat to him for taking those chances, because this is one of the most original, unique fantasy series I've ever read. You're not going to read The Dark Tower and never say, oh yeah, this is like this and this is like that. I mean, I think the closest I can think of is there's one part where you're answering riddles that you might say, oh, it's like Lord of the Rings. Outside of that, nothing in this series feels like anything else I've ever read before. It's incredibly unique, And again, I just can't say enough about him just going for it and just following his heart and writing what he wanted to write. A lot of people call it his magnus opus. I think that's a great way to put it. Might not have been really, really excited about the way that it did go, but this is definitely one of the stories. The journey is greater than the destination, and the journey and those characters' relationships along the way is just peak Stephen King, man. Guys. I can't recommend it enough. Fantasy fan, horror fan, sci-fi fan, doesn't matter. It's got a little bit of everything thrown into a blender. Somehow, he's a magician that does make it work. Number 6, I got to think the book that he calls his scariest book that he's ever written. And I do love me some vampires, guys. The second vampire book that I ever read was Salem's Lot. And yes, it has some of the scariest things I've ever read. I remember reading this in high school, and I'm reading that window scene, home alone at night. There's a part where the Glick brothers are going through the forest at night. That scared the hell out of me because I've always found the woods scary. We grew up at a portion. We moved a lot as kids, but there was one portion where we stayed for a couple years where we had just like acres and acres and acres of forest behind us. And that scared the hell out of me. Reading this book was really just eye-opening for me in many ways because it is absolutely terrifying. He's such a vicious writer at this stage of his career. No one is safe. This is where he first really started writing. Ben, I guess he's writing himself into the story, because it's always an author as his protagonist kind of thing. But it works never better than here. I think this group that he puts together to fight these vampires is just terrific. Barlow is an incredible villain, one of his best, I think. And it's just one of those things where I long for when I talk about how this is back when vampires were written to be scary as hell, man. They weren't written to be sexy. They weren't written to be hopeless romantics. They were written to, you were food. And that's what made this scary because it was putting kids in danger. I think that's what made it even scarier. But man, just such a memorable book. So many characters. I think this was kind of like the precursor to what he would end up doing in Needful Things, is he would just create this incredible community of characters. So many characters. And you never have a hard time differentiating who is who because he gives them all unique things about them that makes you remember, okay, that's the guy that does this. This is the lady that does this. This is the person that's, stepping out on their wife. It really gives you something where you feel like you know this community. So when everything goes to shit, you're really, really feeling for them because you feel like you know this town, this small town, this small community, and seeing it go to hell, it's just heartbreaking and it's terrifying. And again, it's definitely one of the scariest books I think I've ever read of his, except for number 5. Making me pick his scariest story, without a doubt, for me, it has to be Pet Sematary. And I think the reason I go with Pet Sematary is because I read Pet Sematary as a teenager, and I thought, well, he gave me what I wanted. He gave me my scary stuff. That's just what I wanted to be scared by Stephen King when I was 15 years old. And Pet Sematary did that. I read it again in my late 30s after I had kids, and it scared me in an incredibly different way, an absolutely horrible way. So I say, this book will give you those frights that you would expect in a Stephen King book, but then it'll give you those, I think, every parent's worst nightmare, losing a child. And he writes grief in a way I've never, ever read again. No one has been able to do what he does in this book. There's one particular passage in that book that will forever be ingrained in my memory. Watch my Pet Sematary review. If you want to hear it, I recite it in the beginning of that. It's just such an incredible chapter. And he does this thing where he flashes forward of what this kid's life would have been should they live, and just completely destroyed me as a parent hearing that. It's really, really a great book. I think that everybody has something different to take from it. Again, this is one of those where if you want just to be scared, you're going to get those things. If you want to be scared of a different way, if you want to learn how these characters are processing grief, if you want a lot of we have some things that terrified us as kids. Like you hear about this character whose sister, Zelda, is one of the scariest things I've ever read. And it's like, that's not what this book is even about. And that may be one of the scariest things about it. It's just such a dark and twisted story. And I love the ending. I think it's ambiguous as hell, but geez, it's dark. It's brilliant. And I think Pascal is a character that will always stick in my memory. Incredible story. And the real history of it about how he had to dive and save one of his kids from hitting by a truck in real life. And that's what influenced his story, along with his daughter's cat dying. It's really, really brutal stuff. And you see at the time, he really would. I think this book scared him so much that he put it in a drawer for years because he was so scared of it. And it ended up becoming one of his biggest hits later in life. Really, really incredible, the process going through getting this book released. And I think its legacy is kind of told. I feel like anybody, they never read it, they never seen it, you say Pet Sematary, they know what you're talking about because that's how much of a cultural impact this book had. And it's very deserving of it. Another book that has a great impact, I think, in pop culture for many reasons. For a lot of people, it's the movie. For some people, it's the book, obviously. And it's one of those rare instances where I feel like the book and the movie are very, very different, but I find them both really just deliciously awesome. And that's The Shining. I think what Kubrick did with The Shining was amazing. I understand why Steven didn't like it. I think the book of The Shining is amazing. Again, it makes me understand why Steven didn't like it. I do feel like there's a place of existence for both of them. I think that's why Dr. Sleep by Mike Flanagan worked so much, because it was a sequel to Kubrick's movie while also adapting King's book, Dr. Sleep. And I felt like it was the best of both worlds. It was a perfect marriage between the two. But what The Shining can do is, I think, as a kid, when your parents were pissed off, there wasn't nothing in the world scarier to you, and seeing how Danny's watching his dad just become this evil thing is just horrifying. And I think if there's anything scarier as a kid as your dad going postal and deciding to chop up you and your mother, right? That's scary stuff. But he writes like the haunted hotel in a way that everyone's been chasing since. Not saying he was the first to do it. I'm just saying everyone who grew up reading The Shining and they're saying, I'm going to write ghost stories, they're still trying to do things like what he does in The Shining. Now, he was obviously influenced by not Mary Shelley, probably Mary Shelley as well, but Shirley Jackson was a great influence on him writing this book. His own battles with alcoholicism, that was really obviously written. And again, I think Steven writing his demons on the page is what really helped him get some of those things out. And it's never been more prevalent, I don't think, as with Jack Torrance. It was a lot of his own personal demons that he was fighting and writing on the page in the form of Jack Torrance and the Overlook Hotel. And it's just a haunting story. I don't feel like I need to tell you anything more about it. You know why this book is so great. How is it only number 4? It's because, guys, the top 3 just have just such significance to me. Beginning with number 3, I did not think in the 90s he could write a book that could crack the top 3 for me. At this time, I'm full on his fan club. I've read all the greatest hits, obviously. He's firmly entrenched as my favorite author of all time. Nothing he can release after this can ever top those things that we got in the 80s, right? Well, The Green Mile came out and completely floored me because he wrote in such a way that it just kind of like was about like the human spirit, I guess you say. There's something about this story that really just hit me right here in a way I hadn't hit before. Now, he'd written Pet Sematary. I said he dealt with great grief and things like that. But this book writes just about such tragic loss and misunderstandings and miscommunication and just downright just wrong things happening to the wrong people. It's again, sometimes bad things happen to good people. I think that's kind of what this story emphasizes with what happens to John Coffey, that you have this really just truly amazing miracle of a person and they're wrongfully accused. And what does Paul have to do? Does he have to do his job? He questions, do I do my job, which is running death row here, or do I, how do I go to heaven one day and tell God I killed this amazing miracle? I think that's something that just always stuck with me, hit me right here. I think as I was at that age where I was having like a kind of a crisis of faith a little bit, I think we all kind of go through that as a teenager. So this was perfect timing for me, I think. And they released one per month there for 6 months, I think. That's how they did it, kind of serialized, because I think he said he was very much influenced by Blackwater, the book that I really, really love by Michael McDowell. And it's very much, you can see that when I went and read Blackwater last year, I could see where he kind of got that idea from. But Green Mile, I think, is just a magnificent book, great adaptation as well. I think it captures everything that makes that book magical. But it was Steven just hitting a new level that I never expected in the 90s. And somehow, guys, the book is somewhat sadder than the movie, which is amazing. Because that movie will bring you to tears, I think, every time. At least it does me. It does me, but there's even some more brutality that happens to Paul after the credits roll in that movie. And I suggest you, if you like the movie, please check out the book, because it's even better. And it's hard to do, because it really is a great adaptation. Maybe the best adaptation. I don't know. It's up there for sure. Number 2, guys, I feel like you guys can figure out the top 2 at this point. What order? I mean, if you've been around the channel for a while, you probably know. I have to go with The Stand at number 2, because The Stand is a book, honestly, I didn't read until like 2017. It was one of those I kind of always put off for a while because it was just so long. That was my excuse. I don't want to read it because it's just so long. And I don't know, there was just something, I always saw the cover and I thought it looked kind of weird. And now I think the cover's awesome. But I thought the cover was kind of weird. And it was when I got a hold of the uncut edition. I was like, okay, so this is like some uncensored, this is a story he meant to put out. It's even longer. Let's read that one. And I loved it. I completely just chewed through this book. Again, it was one of those where it's like, how can you have a cast this big and there's no throwaway characters? I love or love to hate every single character here. I want to see them have their redemption arc. I want to see them, just go embrace their full darkness. Everything about these characters was just a journey. And you feel like you're walking with these characters. It's very much like his version of Lord of the Rings, like I say, in a different kind of setting. I can see why people think that. For me, it's like this is firmly entrenched in the fantasy category. For me, it's very much like dystopian. Obviously, you're dealing with an epidemic that kills 99.6% of the population. And it just deals with a kind of rebuilding society. There's going to be people who want to go back to the way things were, even though you probably never exactly go back to the way things were, but you want to kind of establish a civilization again, where we're not just like robbing and murdering each other in the streets. And then there's people who feel on like, no, this is the new world, baby, and you got to kill or be killed. And it does a lot of questioning, kind of our morality, I think. And you see some really just amazing character arcs. Larry Underwood's one of my favorite characters that King's ever written. Incredible character arc for him. But everyone, you love all the characters in the story. It's really, really good. And of course, the introduction to maybe his greatest villain ever, the Man in Black, Randall Flagg. This is very much his introduction. We'll go into greater things in the Dark Tower, but this is the very first introduction of him, and he is quite memorable in this story. And The Stand is just one that will never, ever leave my mind because it's just an amazing journey and characters I could just not get enough of. It could have been 500, 1,000 more pages. I would have kept reading because I just wanted to spend time with these characters in this world. It's just fabulous what he does. And you've done the math at this point. Like I said, if you're new here, you might not know. If you've been here for even a few months, you know my favorite Stephen King book of all time, number one, is It. It has been It ever since 1990. That miniseries with Tim Curry came out in 1990. Grew up in a very, very strict religious household. Was told Stephen King was the devil. I wasn't allowed to read him. And in 1990, the movie came out on ABC. My mom was like, well, if it's on ABC, I guess it's okay. So I watched it, and this was the gateway to me for all things Stephen King. 1993, I moved to Houston, and we had a library in our apartment complex, and they had It. So I checked it out, and I kept it a secret from my mom all summer. Would only read it, either when she was gone or when she was in bed already. So it took me the whole summer to read it. And it just clicked with me on a level that nothing had ever clicked before. I've always loved coming of age. I grew up reading To Kill a Mockingbird, Mark Twain, things like that. So I had always loved coming of age, and this gave me 7 coming of age stories under great supernatural distress, and I think that this just made me just love these characters so much. And what makes this book truly magical is when I read it as a teenager, I really loved the part of them as kids, the adults not so much. Then I read it again around 2015, 2016 as an adult, and I was like, oh my God, I'm nostalgic for those kid parts, but I'm understanding those adult parts a lot more, those different worries that you have as an adult, and it just made so much sense. And again, that's what I think makes Stephen such a dark wizard, man, is his books just mean different things to you at different stages in life. You can read them when you're a teenager and be scared. You can read them when you're older and understand a lot of the underlying themes that he had in these stories. You can relate a lot more to some of the adult characters. And that's just what makes him just truly magical. And that's why he's my favorite author of all time, guys. And it's one of those things where I look at this list and I'm like, ask me again tomorrow, this list might change, And I think that's because his stories are just so wonderful, so many great stories that I had to cut out here in the top 10 that I could just talk about forever. Who knows? Maybe I'll do 11 from 20 one day. But as of right now, I'm doing a great reread of all these things slowly and doing my Into the Multiverse series in case you've missed that. So I'm doing everything in publication order and doing the video for that. And then after a certain amount, I'm doing these tier lists, these rankings of these. And I'm very close. I got one more book. I got to do Dark Tower number 7 before I can do my next tier list video. And a lot of you guys have been hanging on for a while for those. But, the old ones were there if you want to go and check them out. But I am going to be working on that here soon. And then the long wait for tier list number 5 comes out. But we're getting closer to the end as I'm getting closer and closer to catching up with him here in real time. But guys, again, favorite author of all time, and you try to narrow down 10 books as someone who's been writing as long as Stephen King has, it's very, very difficult. But again, these were the 10 that I came up with after much deliberation. But I would be more interested in knowing your top 10 Stephen King books. If that's too many, Jay, just give me your top 3. I would love to know what your favorite Stephen King book is. Again, there's no wrong answers in something like this. There's going to be people who are going to say, I've only read this one book and I love it, and I appreciate that. I had someone the other day tell me that Tommyknockers is their favorite Stephen King book. That's awesome, man, because I know just because a book is kind of on the lower end for me doesn't mean it's going to be like that for everybody else. And I think it's because he's such a diverse author, and he just writes a little something that's going to click with people in many, many different ways. And again, that's what's made him my favorite author of all time. So thank you for watching, guys. I'd love to know your ranking. Why don't you go ahead and drop down below and let me know, and I will talk to you there.